Hello, everybody. My name is Meredith Hayes. For a few of you might not know me, but I think most of you do. I'm very glad to be here. Almost didn't make it. Birth was tough. Not to mention, but I did okay with birth, and kindergarten was tough. I still remember reaching out for my mother as she left me there for the first time. I did a little bit better in elementary school. High school took a bit of a hit there too. But anyway, perhaps you can relate to the idea of not liking high school. Anybody else in the audience not like high school? Yeah, a few. Well, considering all the stupid acts and everything that we go through, it's amazing that we survive our teenage years. But anyway, I'm glad to be here, and specifically I'm glad to be in this room. It's a chance to contribute to something that's very close to my heart, this movement. And in no other place on earth will you find, outside of this movement, such a concentrated form of leadership of the type that we need right now for the kind of change that we need. I'm out of my comfort zone. I'm not used to public speaking. I'm not trained in it. Maybe there are some people in here who are out of their comfort zone as well. Is there anybody here who's here for the first time? Are you here for the first time? So you're out of your comfort zone. Did you know what you were getting into when you came?
I kind of had an idea. I had one talk with Dave Nelson.
Right. Well, congratulations. Congratulations for making it out, for getting out of your comfort zone. I think a lot of us are in the same boat. I mean, it's an actual, I would say that to make it out here in person is really a revolutionary act in itself. In our culture, which is so used to getting information online or in some other form, to come out to an actual conversation is something of a revolutionary act. So congratulations to that. Now, our presence here actually, I would further say, shows leadership, and that leadership is desperately needed in the world at this time. In order to learn requires that you get out of your comfort zone. You cannot learn while you're in it. So the full-time members of this movement are out of their comfort zone on a daily basis. It's their job. And you learn to have a taste for it. You learn to distrust being too comfortable for too long, especially considering the current situation. It's a bit crazy to be comfortable under these conditions. So, good on us. Now, what brought me to lead a class on education? The title that I gave to my class was Educating a Renaissance. Well, I work in education, and I work as an aide with special needs, and in my job I get to obviously work with a lot of different students. I'm assigned to certain students, but I also tend to work with a lot of the students who are having troubles of one type or another. Maybe they're not specifically coded, but we as aides tend to hang with them. And in doing so, what I saw, I started off working at high school, and what I saw was that among these kids, especially the kids who were having troubles, was that there was a whole bunch of genius left in our school system, among our student body, left unmined, essentially untapped. And that's something which needs to be rectified. Then I moved to elementary school, and I saw something quite different, where in high school, the mood is, there's a lot of angst. Now, that could be simply hormonal, but I don't think so. You have a situation where things tend to get worse over time. And so, but then in going to elementary school, I realized, hey, this is not the way that kids come to school. I like elementary school quite a bit. It suits me a lot more. There's a lot more energy. Kids are a lot more bubbly, goofy, but also quite willing to learn. So what happens to them over the course of their education where they lose this enthusiasm for learning? Not everybody, but certainly the ones who have trouble have a greater attrition, let's say, in the education system. And even I would say the ones who are successful, knowing what we know from studying with the LaRouche movement about the basic axioms, the basic beliefs of what we're teaching, in a way the talented students get off even worse. And this is a process that we see degenerating to the point where in organizing and in trying to get people to be excited about putting themselves into the process of creating real change, we often have more trouble with people who are educated at the university level than we do with people, who for one reason or another didn't go to university, or if we talking to people who are before they're going to university. So something's going on. The general feeling among educators in the schools is what I believe, which is our curriculum is incompetent. And I've said as much directly in those words to aides, to teachers, even to one principal. And I don't get... I would have thought that being an aide that I would have gotten a little bit of resistance to this, someone to tell me, sort of put me in my place, but I actually got agreement. I've gotten agreement across the board. I've yet to have someone snap at me and say, who the heck are you? What do you know about education? I went up to one principal and I said, the reason we're having trouble with these students, who I took it upon myself to take these students out of class to try and teach them something because they were disrupting the class and they weren't learning anything anyway. I said the reason we're having trouble with them is that the math program is essentially incompetent. I said this to the principal, and he kind of went, yeah, Ministry of Education. So there's a problem. I'd like to sorry, just one more case where there was a relief teacher, and it was an 8th grade class teaching history, and they were teaching something which, to anybody who's politically aware, who's fighting for the Republican cause, would cause them great angst. And so this was on the subject of American imperialism as a concept. This is official Quebec history class. I'm sorry I didn't bring the example, but this is something that's handed down to the teachers as curriculum, teaching about the ideas of American imperialism. Now it's kind of a joke because in this particular class, there were a couple of young girls a couple of students who I'm sure were high. One of them was stroking the hair of one of the boys, whose hormones are going crazy anyway, and he was just kind of laying back and chilling. The rest of them are kind of playing little games, doing anything but listening to the teacher, and then the special needs students who I'm working with, who are actually fairly keen to learn, are looking at me imploringly to, hey, can we go somewhere else? And but I went up to the teacher afterwards and I said, you know, what you're teaching is factually incorrect. You know, what you're teaching is just absolute, you know, just actually wrong. And I wasn't really digging into her because I know it's not her per se. And she said something very interesting. She said, well, if I don't teach the curriculum the way it's laid out, I could stand to lose my position. I could stand to lose my license to teach. So there's a pressure on our educators, and I've met many of them obviously, and I have a lot of respect for the individual educators, many of them. There's moments of magic that happens in these classrooms, but they happen in spite of the curriculum and not because of it. I'd like to just read a couple of things from a guy named John Gatto, who wrote, he's written a few things, but one book called Dumbing Us Down caught my eye. And there's a lot of problems with his analysis of what's going on, but you'll see that the way his take on what's going on, I think, is fairly accurate. So okay, wait a second. That's pretty small. Can everybody read that? Is that okay? If we move the machine, it's going to go yellow on us. So, does someone want to give this a crack? Okay.
During my time as a school teacher, I've come to believe that genius is an exceedingly common human quality, probably natural to most of us. I didn't want to accept that notion. Far from it. My own training in 2 elite universities taught me that intelligence and talent distributed themselves economically over a bell curve, and that human destiny, because of those mathematical, seemingly irrefutable scientific facts, was as rigorously determined as John Calvin contended. The trouble was that the unlikeliest kids kept demonstrating to me at random moments so many of the hallmarks of human excellence: insight, wisdom, justice, resourcefulness, courage, originality, that I became confused. They didn't do this often enough to make my teaching as easy, but they did it often enough that I began to wonder, reluctantly, whether it was possible that being in school itself was what was dumbing them down.
Do you want to continue? Just read the next one.
I've noticed a fascinating phenomenon in my 25 years of teaching, that schools and schooling are increasingly irrelevant to the great enterprises of the planet. No one believes anymore that scientists are trained in science classes, or politicians in civic classes, or poets in English classes. The truth is that schools don't really teach anything, except how to obey orders. This is a great mystery to me because thousands of the humane, caring people work in schools as teachers and aides and administrators. But the abstract logic of the institution overwhelms their individual contributions. Although teachers do care and do work very, very hard, the institution is psychopathic. It has no conscience. It rings a bell, and the young man in the middle of writing a poem must close his notebook and move to a different cell, where he must memorize that humans and monkeys derive from a common ancestor.
So pretty bleak, pretty bleak. And like I said, you know, there are problems with his analysis, which I won't go into right now. But I think that certain parts of what he's saying here speaks to a general feeling among the population and among educators about our education system. There's a problem. So, what's happened to us? What's becoming of us? Here we are, as Jean-Philippe, I'm sure, briefed you, on the edge of extinction. How do we become so stupid? You know, really. I mean, everybody knows that everything that's going on, all these wars, are a lie. Everybody knows that they're stupid, right? What about the bailouts? Do you think that there are many people out there who think, no, actually the bailouts, they're a good idea? People understand that there's something wrong with this, and a very short briefing by any of our organizers on the streets clarifies to people that this bailout is insane. We don't get a lot of, no, we got to keep bailing out. We don't get any of that these days that I've seen. There's a moment in the Iliad where there's a threat of diplomacy breaking out. There's a moment where there's a lull in the battle, and the two sides start talking about making concessions, about talking to the other side, about seeing if there's a way around this war. And just at that moment, one of the gods whispers in a soldier's ear, and that soldier then throws a spear at the opposition and kills one of them, and the war resumes to the culmination of destroying everything in the end. Do you think anybody's whispering in the ears of the so-called opposition groups in Syria? What about a whispering in our own ears? What do you suppose is the residue of environmentalism in terms of our outlook for humanity? Does thermonuclear war matter if there are really just too many people on the planet? And I can tell you, it's part of a bigger project for me, but I can tell you that these ideas are being pushed in our schools as standard curriculum. I mean, I have fun challenging them a few times. It's not hard, pros and cons of wind energy. This and that and the other, and then I put up my hand, and the teachers are always very generous. I'm allowed to participate in the learning process. This is a grade 10 class, and I said, well, because wind energy is not renewable. Wait a minute, we're on the renewable energy column here. And it's very easy to explain to people, well, you can't make the steel, you can't create the machines with wind energy. You can't renew it itself. You're going to burn down your fossil fuels to the ground. You're going to use them up faster if you go with these policies. Okay? So we're also on the edge of a renaissance. I mean, the tragedy of this situation is not that everybody's trying their darndest and we're just coming up against insurmountable obstacles in the natural universe. This is not our problem. The solution to this problem is well defined. We have a whole slew of amazing projects to undertake. So, we need to internalize these. We need to light a fire of optimism within our hearts, kick ourselves in the butt, so to speak. And we have to beat the odds and rescue humanity from the edge of making a terrible mistake. Rescue humanity from the certain despair that will result from our failure to succeed in this revolution. So what will the policy look like that we can adopt, such as will create a culture, nation, and citizenry of which we can be proud to be a part? So this is a work in progress, and my basic thesis is that the Renaissance that we need will require a new and truly revolutionary expression of the Platonic school of thought concerning mind, truth, beauty, and the good. also that this principle does not exist currently as a dominant policy principle in our education system. And finally, that such a state of affairs, that our success in this, that our success in creating this change will be a product of human intention and not of the gambler's chance. It's not an ebb and flow of the chart, so to speak. Okay. I'm going to be concentrating on the more positive aspect of this. There is a lot of work to do in terms of collecting data and so on to put forth a formal proof of the degeneracy of our system. It's there to do, but today I'm going to be concentrating on what will it look like? Because I think that a lot of these things are things that are common sense. So we're going to be reading a lot of Plato. I hope you're up for a lot of Plato. It's exciting because within Plato you get the basis for every Renaissance, every scientific discovery that's ever been made by humanity ever. Nothing of significance, nothing of universal significance has been discovered in the opposing school of thought. So, what do you want from your child's education? Now, I suspect that this is universal, even if we haven't thought about it too much. I mean, I think it stresses parents out quite a bit. Where are we going to put our child for school? What are we going to do? No one thinks, I want my son to be frustrated, unable to think clearly. I hope boredom in the classroom drives him towards taking drugs. I can't wait to kick him out of the house. Well, you might want to have the person go off, but you want them to have a certain sense of autonomy. So, anybody, I just shout them out. What do you want from education? What do you want the effect to be in the personality of your offspring?
Maturity.
Maturity, okay. Wisdom, nice. Courage. Creativity, certainly, yeah.
I don't have, it's too late for me, but if I were to be able to have kids, I would want adventurousness and exploratory.
Yeah, inquisitiveness, in a sense, optimism, right?
Yeah.
Optimism, because if you're optimistic, you're going to go out there, you're going to explore, right? This process of coming to learn, of coming to discover things, this is really, so I would think that everybody wants that. I mean, every normal person would want that, no? Anybody disagree? But what of the oligarchical concept, the oligarchical mindset? Another common belief in society is that the government's totally corrupt. We're completely controlled by forces that are beyond our influence. Right? What is that mindset, that perceived mindset, want? What is the education system, which I would say includes our media? What would the oligarch want out of those things?
So you'd be negative.
Create pessimism, sure, yeah. If you're pessimistic, you're not going to go exploring. You're not going to believe in yourself to make a discovery of truth in some place of interest for yourself.
Well, those four things that you said, truth, beauty, and what were the other two?
Truth, beauty, the mind, and the good.
Good, yeah. I mean, if those were in politics, if those were in the system now, we would be in the situation we're in.
Yeah.
So, you know, like,
Yeah.
I cheered that
Yeah.
silently.
Bravo.
And
Well,
said that.
that's exactly it. That's what this whole thing is about. It's to bring back the moral substance to our political system, which includes our education system. That's it. Now, so the intention, it's an intention here, because in the oligarchical model, I would say, first of all, oligarchs are in many cases fighting against their own progeny for political power. So they might not even want their own progeny to be all that bright. Secondly, they're certainly fighting against the herd. And if the herd starts standing up on its hind legs, well, this frustrates them. Means they have to work harder. But there's also, as you know, a hatred of mankind among that the basic belief system of that. So they're going to create a situation that generally keeps people fixed and destroys these things that common people want. Anyway, enough of that. The intention of education within a Republican tradition. What is the intention of education, or what should the intention be? And furthermore, if it's to become part of our political system, well, what would our leaders look like, right? What would our leaders look like? Now,
If what was to become? Are we talking about
If-
the Republican system becoming?
sorry, let me explain. We have a problem because we have a Republican Party which is a circus and doesn't represent any principle at all. When I say the Republican principle, I'm talking about what Plato ultimately represented and represents today. It is the intention of the original founding fathers of the United States. It was the intention of Lincoln. It was the intention of all of the great presidents of the United States. And the intention is basically that people should be free, that creativity exists, that the mind exists as an effective principle, and that we can, because we're optimistic, and we must create a system that tends to improve the chances of that type of development, the development of beauty and wisdom and all of these characteristics within the individual. But Plato, within the Republic, sorry, I wasn't specific. We're going to be looking specifically at the Republic, okay, which starts out as a discussion which compares, it's the question of who is it better to be just or to appear just, but really be a conniving, you know what? Yeah, what is truly beneficial? Okay.
Did you say conniving joy?
Jerk, essentially. Like,
Joik.
Oh.
Joik. Right. Yes. So within such a system, within a system which, well, first of all, what should our leaders look like? Okay. We're dealing with of language, a failure of leadership in our society. And again, I'm just going to stress that your being here is a sign of exactly the type of leadership that we need. Okay? When your government ceases to exist because it's become so corrupted that it doesn't even pay attention to the principles laid out in its own constitution, well, then you have to bring something from outside the system to change it. And that thing from outside is us, is people. Okay? So I need a Socrates and I need an Adamantus.
Yeah, sure.
So, Socrates. Okay. Would you like to be Adimantus, JP?
We have a Greek guy.
Can you read it from back there?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, I hesitated before to say the rash things I've said. I
replied.
But now, let me be brave and say that our guardians, in the fullest sense, must be philosophers.
Adimantus.
So be it.
Think how few of them there are likely to be. The elements in the character which we said they must have don't usually combine into a whole, but are normally found separately.
What do you mean?
Readiness to learn and remember, quickness and keenness of mind, and the qualities that go with them, and enterprise and breadth of vision aren't usually combined with readiness to live an orderly, quiet, and steady life. Their keenness makes such temperaments very unpredictable and quite devoid of steadiness.
True.
And again, steady, consistent characters on whom you can rely, and who are unmoved by fear and war, are equally unmoved by instruction. Their immobility amounts indeed to numbness, and faced with anything that demands intellectual effort, they yawn and sink into slumber.
That's all quite true.
But we demand a full and fair share of both sets of qualities from anyone who is to be given the highest form of education, and any share of office or authority.
And rightly.
So the character we want will be a rare occurrence.
It will.
And we must not only test it in the pains and fears and pleasures we have already described, but also try it out in a series of intellectual studies which we omitted before, to see if it has the endurance to pursue the highest forms of knowledge without flinching, as others flinch in physical trials.
Fair test.
Good. I wanted to start with this because it gives a picture of what a leader would look like. Standing the trial, standing the test in the pains and fears and pleasures we have already described. Okay, we'll get to those. But in thinking of these, in thinking of this idea of a leader, does anybody come to mind? Lyndon LaRouche, yeah. I would say Kennedy also falls in there.
Lincoln.
You know, you're up against pressures, right? When the chips fall, you have to stand. You have to stand for what's true in the face of all that. What about John Kerry? Right? I just want to make a comparison here. John Kerry, for those who don't know, caved and came out with a bogus argument in support of Obama's war in Libya, and thus removed one bit of pressure to take Obama out. We're suffering the effects of his failure. What about Bill Clinton? Surprising, eh?
He was smart. He was a good man when he was in office, but he made mistakes.
The pressure, right? Does he measure up to this? Right? We're now suffering the effects of Bill Clinton's failure because he has come out in support of Obama during this current circus campaign. Who knows what kind of pressure Bill's under? You know, maybe his actual life's at stake. You know, maybe it's his wife's life that's at stake, is maybe closer to, but who knows? But the point being is that there's an abandonment of those principles that he once stood for, that he probably in his truest self still does. All right. So, you know, in history, who are you rooting for, right? Everybody we're rooting for is taking a bullet. Well, maybe not everybody, but man, a huge portion of them, right? Lincoln bites it. You know, they had to kill another 3 people in a row, or 2 people in a row, Garfield and then McKinley, right? They had to kill another 2 people in a row just to get the Wall Street man in there. And then Kennedy, but not just Kennedy, his brother, right? Martin Luther King. True leaders. Hey, the empire doesn't have an argument. They have to kill you. Is that really all that omnipotent? Is it really omnipotent to have the capacity to put a bullet in someone's head when your entire system is threatened to be taken down because that person's uttering a single word of truth?
I wish I hadn't said ballistic. Kind of distracted with that coffee and that.
So, what if we could facilitate such a culture of mind in society generally to increase the chances of developing such a leader, and also to increase the chances of keeping such a person alive, right? Who's the protection for the leader? Well, again, it's us. And why do we protect him or her? Because we need him. We need her. So, as it turns out, if your education is going to be of the nature to actually develop the best people, well, guess what? You get to put yourself in touch with the most exciting discoveries, with the most beautiful poetry, with the best moments in history. And you get to own them. They are our legacy. That's what we're losing here. That's what's being stolen from us in our education system, because not everything in the system is factually incorrect. You need math, you need grammar, and so on. But what's missing in terms of the creativity and the beauty, that's what's killing us. So, what do we have here? So in the first stage of education, section 3 in the Republic, Socrates says to Adeimantus, you should hesitate to change the style of your literature because you risk everything if you do. The music and literature of a country cannot be altered without major political and social changes. So this is really a question of culture. What is the environment within which we're growing up? Okay? And I've got a bit of a reading. Can we have another Socrates? Bob, do you want to be Socrates? Who wants to be Glaucon? Want to be Glaucon, Dave?
Sure.
Okay.
It is not only to the
Your bothers a big well, it's 2, that's 2.
It's too small? Okay. Would you care to? Okay, who wants to be Socrates?
I'll be Socrates.
Yeah? Great. Awesome.
It is not only to the poets, therefore, that we must issue orders requiring them to portray good character in their poems or not to write at all. We must issue similar orders to all artists and craftsmen and prevent them portraying bad character, ill discipline, meanness, or ugliness in pictures of living things, in sculpture, architecture, or any work of art, and if they are unable to comply, they must be forbidden to practice their art among us. We shall thus prevent our guardians being brought up among representations of what is evil, and so day by day and little by little, by grazing widely, as it were, in an unhealthy pasture, insensibly doing themselves a cumulative psychological damage that is very serious. We must look for artists and craftsmen capable of perceiving the real nature of what is beautiful, and then our young man living, as it were, in a healthy climate, will benefit because all the works of art they see and hear influence them for good, like the breezes from some healthy country, insensibly leading them from earliest childhood into close sympathy and conformity with beauty.
And reason.
Totally confused.
Okay. Well, what's he basically saying here? He's saying that that we need to order the poets to portray what is beautiful in character and in nature, or stop writing. And to do this, to create a situation where people can grow up and, in a process, to associate with these ideas of beauty.
So the cultivation of Renaissance ideals?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. The just a note of point. The 15th century Renaissance was a product of a new expression of the Platonic school of thought, of this exact idea. So was the German Renaissance, and so on. Yeah, yeah. So this is what's called classical culture.
Well, I just throw it because, you know, it sounds like he's being very authoritative.
Yes.
And he is, but what he's saying is that there must be a standard for beauty,
Yeah.
for truth.
Yeah.
And what we see in our culture is that there is no standard for truth. There is no standard for what's healthy, for what's normal. And so people have no reference point for what is good, because they live in a culture which actually promotes ugliness, right? In art, like, the more you can make the person feel uncomfortable and almost, you know, make them feel sick, that art's, it's doing what it's doing, because it's just breaking down any barrier, any moral barrier anyone may have. So, yeah, your environment must uphold a standard of beauty for which people can actually refer to.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say that it does have that edge that you're talking about. When I first read this, and there's more of it, in fact, we can...
I can read Glaucon.
Yeah. Okay, Glaucon. Just read that. We'll finish this up, and then...
That would indeed be the best way to bring them up.
Would you like to continue? Yeah.
And that, my dear Glaucon, I said, is why this stage of education is crucial. For rhythm and harmony penetrate deeply into the mind and take a most powerful hold on it. And if education is good, bring and impart grace and beauty. It is bad, the reverse, and moreover the proper training we propose to give will make a man quick to perceive the shortcomings of works of art or nature, whose ugliness he will rightly dislike. And anything beautiful he will welcome gladly, will make his own, and so grow in true goodness of character. Anything ugly he will rightly condemn and dislike, even when he is still young and cannot understand the reason for doing so. While when reason comes, he will recognize and welcome her as a familiar friend because of his upbringing. In my view, he said, that is the purpose.
That's Glaucon.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, good.
In my view, that is the purpose of this stage of education.
Okay, so he's talking about early education. And that's another thing to keep in mind with this, right? We're talking about impressionable minds. What should be within the classrooms of young children?
That's not so authoritarian, because if you're 13 years old, you can't see a slasher movie. If you can't watch pornography, you can't, I don't know, go to like a club and drink alcohol. So it's not really that authoritarian.
Well, that's right, and that's the context it has to be viewed in. Yeah.
Just throw the difference here is that these are all subjective principles and ideas, which are still being upheld to this same standard of, you know, you can objectively treat these things. Right, we're talking about ideas, and that's kind of what you don't believe, there's more than just your sense perception,
Right.
then you can't really have
Yeah.
any sort of standard of truth for any of these things.
That's it. That's it. And so, yes, I mean, it begs the question, what is the nature of this good? What is the nature of this beauty? What is the nature of all of these things? Very quickly, the discussion in the Republic becomes an exploration of the idea of justice, which I'll get to in a bit. Okay, so yeah, and so Socrates finally finishes. He says, "And that, I think, concludes what we have to say about this stage of education, and a very appropriate conclusion too. For the object of education is to teach us to love what is beautiful." Right? Not to teach us what is beautiful. It's like you were saying. There's a subjective aspect to it.
Trying to scratch to know about something, to learn about something, is kind of a way to love something also. Because the fact of learning and want to learn is now that you love that object that you're learning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is really close. There's something really close with the love and learning.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, the people that you love the most, you know the most.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you want to know more about them. That's why you love them.
Uh-huh.
That's true. We'll continue. 'Cause, I mean, that's a good jump-off point for a major conversation. I would just add at this point that you said what you study, you learn to love because you're studying it. What if we were to turn our study to the study of the human mind itself? Could we develop a healthy love of humanity and the human mind? So that's what Socrates is doing here. In the next section on guardians and auxiliaries, Socrates is challenged by Adeimantus because there's a lot of rules. This goes further. It goes into music. It goes into the pleasures that the I'm gonna make sure I don't have that. Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Right. Oh, yeah. There's a lot here, and I'm not sure how much time we're going to take, but so after the idea of culture and the idea of music and poetry, and Socrates goes into talking about physical education, and he had this interesting thing to say, which I thought pretty poignant. In my view, physical excellence does not of itself produce a good mind and character. On the other hand, excellence of mind and character will make the best of the physique it is given, which I think is pretty cool. And so you see, this is a study of the mind. It's about creating a beautiful mind.
Did you add the emphasis?
No, I didn't add any emphasis. This is this particular translation. It's Penguin's Classic. Yeah, translated by Desmond Lee, so if that means anything to anybody. So this next section is fun because, well, let's just read it, because I think it talks about the problem that happens when people are weak and they're succumbing to these pleasures. What you end up having is a proliferation of law cases and also new ideas about disease, like a lot of very intricate searching into the disease that one might have. Anyway, I think it's good because it talks about, it speaks to the idea of duty. Okay, so
Beauty or duty?
duty. Yeah. Would you like to be Socrates?
Sure.
Want to be Glaucon?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think, with justice, compare these luxurious ways of living and eating with music and song, which used a wide range of mode and rhythm.
Quite so.
Elaborate music, we found, produces indiscipline, and elaborate food produces disease. But simplicity in music produces discipline of character, and simplicity in physical education, health of body.
Very true.
And the prevalence of indiscipline and disease in a community leads, does it not, to the opening of law courts and surgeries in large numbers, and law and medicine begin to give themselves airs, especially when they are taken with great seriousness, even by free men.
That is bound to happen.
And when not only the lower classes and manual workers, but also those who have some pretensions to a liberal education need skilled doctors and lawyers, that is a pretty conclusive proof that the education in a state is disgracefully bad. For is it not a strikingly disgraceful sign of bad education if one has to seek justice at the hands of others as one's masters and judges, because one lacks it in it oneself?
I can't think of anything more disgraceful, he said.
Yet it's still more disgraceful, don't you think, when a man not only spends most of his life in court as plaintiff or defendant, but is even vulgar enough to be proud of it, proud that he is an expert lawbreaker, up to all the dodges, and that he knows all the holes to wriggle through to avoid a conviction. And all this for mean and unworthy ends, without any idea how far better it is to arrange one's life so that one has no need of a jury dozing on the bench.
Yes, that's still more disgraceful.
And it's disgraceful too to need a doctor not only for injury or regular disease, but because by leading the kind of idle life we have described, we have filled our bodies with gases and fluids, like a stagnant pool, and driven the medical profession to invent names for our diseases,
Hello?
like flatulence and
Can I call you back?
catarrh. Don't you agree?
I do indeed. These new flange names of disease are very far-fetched.
And I don't think you would have found them in the days of Asclepius. Or so I should judge from the fact that when Eurypylus was wounded at Troy and given Pramnian wine sprinkled with barley meal and grated cheese to drink, a mixture you would have thought would have given him a fever. The son of Asclepius had no fault to find with the women who gave him the drink, or with Patroclus, who was treating him.
And yet it was an odd prescription for a wounded man.
No, not if you reflect that it was not till the days of Herodicus, so they say, the doctors made use in their treatment of modern methods of cassetting disease. Herodicus was an athletic trainer whose health failed, and he proceeded to make first and foremost himself, and then many others after him, miserable by a combination of medicine and physical training.
How did he do that?
By dying a lingering death. His whole attention was devoted to his disease, which was mortal. He could not cure himself of it, but spent the rest of his life too busy to do anything but doctor himself, and being made wretched by any departure from his routine treatment. And his skill prolonged the struggle against death till he was an old man.
What reward of skill!
And quite a suitable one for a man who did not know that it was not from ignorance or lack of experience of it that Asclepius did not reveal this method of treatment to his successors, but because he knew that when things are well run, each man has a job in society which he must do, and has no time to spend his life being ill and undergoing cures.
Wow, eh? So, personal discomfort. Now, well, does anybody have anything to say about that? Yeah.
I think it's like you said before, it's a metaphor for a society that's becoming sicker because people are just trying to invent mood disorders.
Right.
Because the people growing up in the society aren't growing up well.
Do you think Socrates means by this that we should not put effort into healthcare? I don't think he means that, but I just think he means that you got to have a sense of what your job is. Haven't we lost that? I mean, what is our work for us today? It's a means of income. But is it connected? Do we understand the way it's connected to the rest of society? Do we understand how our position is important to the survival and the betterment of that society? Well, chances are a lot of the jobs don't mean much to society, right? A lot of the stuff is make work, especially when we've gotten rid of the productive work, you know. So this is within the context of a state that is a whole, a state where each part contributes to the betterment of the whole. Okay. Okay, so then okay, so then in the next section, Adeimantus steps in and he challenges Socrates. He says, look, with all of these rules, you're going to make your guardians, what are the guardians? Why would you possibly want to be a guardian? You're not making them happy at all. You know, they've got all these rules, they can do this and not that. You know, they have, because Socrates says also they're not to have an income. There's a whole slew of things they're not allowed to participate in. The things that we come to expect to be basic, in terms of ownership of property and stuff like that, are not permitted in the same way to guardians, even though everything for them is provided. So what's the intention here? Their focus needs to be somewhere else. I'm not sure. This is not so bad. Okay, so I'll be Socrates now. I'll give people a bit of a break. Right. Okay, I cut out a bit of it. Yeah. So he says they're not very happy. He says, and Socrates replies, says, "I think that we shall find a reply if we stick to the path we've been pursuing, and say that though it would not in fact be in the least surprising if our guardians were very happy indeed, our purpose in founding our state was not to promote the particular happiness of a single class, but, so far as possible, of the whole community. Our idea was that we were most likely to find justice in such a community, and similarly injustice in a really badly run community, and in light of our findings, be able to decide the question we are trying to answer. We are therefore, which would be the question of justice, because they're trying to find justice. They're searching for justice at this point. What is justice? There are just acts, but what is the essence of justice itself, the idea? We are therefore at the moment trying to construct what we think is a happy community by securing the happiness not of a select minority, but of the whole. The opposite kind of community we will examine presently, meaning later in the book. Now, if we were painting a statue and were met with the criticism that we were not using the most beautiful colors for the most beautiful part of the body, for we had not colored the eyes, the body's most precious feature, purple, but black, we could, I think, reasonably reply as follows. It is absurd to expect us to represent the beauty of the eye in a way which does not make it look like an eye at all. And the same is true of the other parts of the body. You should look rather to see whether we have made the whole beautiful by giving each part its proper color. So, in the present case, we might go on, don't make us give our guardians the kind of happiness that will make them anything but guardians. We could perfectly well clothe our farmers in robes of state and put crowns on their heads and tell them to cultivate the land at their pleasure. And we could make our potters lie on couches round the fire and let them drink and enjoy themselves, putting their wheel at their side for them to make pots only as they felt inclined. Indeed, we could try to make the whole community happy by giving everyone else similarly blissful conditions. But you must not tell us to do so. For the result of such advice will be that our farmers are no longer farmers, nor are potters potters, and that all the classes that make up our community lose their proper character. In other cases, this does not matter much. The community suffers nothing. Guardians of the laws and state, who alone have the opportunity to bring it good government and prosperity, become a mere sham. Then clearly it is completely ruined. So he continues, so if we are making genuine guardians who will be the last to harm the community, while our critics prefer idlers happily enjoying themselves in something more like a fun fair than a city, then he is not thinking of a community at all. We must therefore decide whether our object in setting up the guardian class is to make it as happy as we can, or whether happiness is a thing we could look for in the community as a whole. If it is, our guardians and auxiliaries must be compelled to act accordingly, and be persuaded, as indeed must everybody else, that it is their business to perfect themselves in their own particular job. Then our state will be built on the right basis. And as it grows, we can leave each class to enjoy the share of happiness its nature permits. Very interesting. So this idea of happiness is something different, perhaps, than mere physical pleasure. Obviously different than mere physical pleasure. And there's also, it's connected to a certain knowledge that you're part of a community, that you're part of a whole. I mean, the question comes in, can you be truly happy if you do not have that connection? Can you be truly happy drowning yourself in physical pleasures if that means that you're totally abandoning your own personal duty, gift, that you're not giving that thing that only you can give as an individual to the community? I would say no. I would say no, you cannot be happy without that. And it's that concept of happiness that is brought forward into the 17th century and 18th century, and is developed by Gottfried Leibniz, the German scientist and statesman, and is developed as the idea of agape, that when we are truly in harmony with what we're, what we can give, when we're at our best in terms of what we can give, and we're connected with this greater idea of happiness, we experience something called agape. Agape being an ancient Greek word for like a divine type of love. And it is this concept that makes its way into the American Constitution via the Declaration of Independence. That's what pursuit of happiness means in the American Constitution. And that was a victory, the fact of the pursuit of happiness and not property, which was the other idea that was being thrown around. Pursuit of happiness won over property. So why did it? Well, ask yourself, which is more eternal? Life, inalienable rights. I mean, property is an inalienable right. You're born, therefore you get. But life, certainly. Liberty. You need life to have liberty. You can't have liberty without life, in the sense of of being living. And you need liberty to be able to pursue happiness. You cannot be in a position to connect with the creativity that you need to in order to gain that agape, to pursue that happiness, if you don't have freedom, if you're not free. And so the principle of freedom becomes an essential part of a free nation.
You can also say that the pursuit of happiness only will lead you to freedom. It also looks like separation.
That's right. That's right. If you aren't able to do your duty, to know your place, and it's a paradox, right? Because this idea of freedom that's pushed upon us in our media and becomes our, young kids' culture. I'm telling you, some of the is actually it means that you don't develop.
Yep.
You become this kind of blob, morally a blob, without much concept of yourself, and therefore with no power to actually be free, to be sovereign.
Because that's how LaRouche defines free will. Free will not in your usual 6-year-old sense of I'm free to do whatever I want, jump off a building, and that's freedom.
Woo! Yeah, freedom!
That's what people consider freedom is. But the fact that no, free will means that you are discovering what's good for you and you're subjecting yourself to that. You're denying, you're breaking away from your sense perceptions. You're breaking away from, by realizing that the immediate pleasures will kill you,
Mm-hmm.
and you must submit yourself to profound discoveries, which may take time, which may take years to develop. But that submission to a higher idea, that willingness to undergo pain, is free will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
That's what distinguishes humans from animals, because animals can't do that. Animals will eat their kids to survive, or will starve their kids.
Right.
If there's a bowl of food,
Mm-hmm.
Animals wouldn't be like, okay, I'll starve,
Mhm.
why don't you go ahead and eat? Animals don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and that's it. And so, you realize that you're disciplining yourself in all of these physical pleasures. You're in a sense denying yourself certain physical pleasures. But why? And what are you after? And so in the mind, in our minds now, we should start to have this thing forming, that there's this higher purpose, this higher motivator. It's a lot more subtle, right? Than the candy, right? But the candy will give you a hangover. And after you've eaten enough candy, well, you kick the bucket. And that candy doesn't come with you.
Is freedom a spiritual concept or a mental concept?
What do you think?
I think it's a spiritual one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and this feeds into the idea that in LaRouche's latest works, especially, but for his whole life, his life's work, he deals with the subject of the human mind and of human immortality. He's an economist, and the basis of economics is a thorough subjective understanding of the human mind and your own potential immortality. When we are reading Socrates, words through Plato, are those personalities not alive right now in our minds? Is this not real immortality?
It's what not
The fact that a personality of a human being long dead can live as an efficient cause in your mind, so that the ideas and the life's work of that human being continues to put pressure upon your mind, in a sense, to influence your mind long after the person's biological life has been extinguished.
No, he's not doing that.
Well-
Socrates isn't doing that, you're doing that.
Well,
You're
he's
bringing
already done
Socrates
it.
to us.
But would I be able to do it now? Would I be able to do it if he didn't do it? No. If you saw me scrambling to get this presentation together, you would know that this guy committed his life, decades, to this understanding as a philosopher. He died for it. And that's another discussion. But that, the fact that he did die for
Are
it.
you a reincarnation of Socrates?
No, I am Meredith Hayes. I am my own personality. But I will say that Socrates as a personality and Plato's conception of Socrates lives within me as an efficient cause, as an actually existing idea. This is what Socrates is actually getting at. He's arguing that reality is not physical, because nothing physical is eternal. It's the process by which reality is, by which the physical reality is formed, the principle by which this reality is formed, that is the eternal concept. And so what are we trying to do here today?
Improve
We're,
our physicality?
well, as an effect, yeah. As an effect. And so we have to get at the cause. We have to get at the cause of what affects that reality. We have to get at the cause of what is going to manifest such things that we all want, such as end of war, end of world hunger. Every child wishes for that from the time that they can speak, practically. And it never happens, and it gets worse. So there's another principle at work. There's some principle in society which is tending, rather than tending towards what we need and want, tends to the opposite. And that's what we have our minds focused on at this time.
I just throw in the idea of whether Socrates is right here, saying what he's saying there, or the fact that it's just being read. If you consider what is the true substance of the presence of Socrates, in terms of what we're discussing in the ideas, whether he's here or not, what would be the true substance of his presence?
Yeah.
You see the ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of substance of any human being, right? How do you, if you plan to have an effect on civilization, how do you have it? You can have as a physical person, you can maybe do some physical labor for it, but the most profound effect would be through the use of human mind. And if future generations can access that discovery in the human mind, which you did, then in a certain sense you never died. Then in a certain sense, can you live through us? Our entire forefathers lived through every human being, every child, is a result of their efforts. It's the result of the wars they fought, the Peloponnesian War, or the Mahabharata, or the biblical war. We all are a result of that eternal fight, which we must continue for future generations.
So we're manifestations of previous manifestations, and we manifest the future. So, I don't know. That's the only way I can
What do you have to say, something?
understand, right?
I was just gonna say, it's like generation to generation. We say when someone dies, when my grandfather dies, we took something of him. So it's our memories of him and what he taught us stays in our hearts and continues. And then when I have children and I leave this world, my child will take his memories of our conversations. If he wrote them down, or if I took a journal and he would read it to his kids, it would go again. So it's generation, and it's the same with Socrates. he wrote down, like Plato wrote these plays, these conversations, and every generation would have read it over the years, because if it wasn't read and recopied and translated generation after generation, we wouldn't even be able to read it. So it's going in our hearts generation by generation of what's written and what's spoken.
Because there's no other species on the planet that has that process. You know, there's no other species on the planet for whom an individual means something. The only way that an individual means something in another species is if that individual is connected somehow with a human being. You know, my cat is different from all the other cats. You know, and he has a name. But in terms of cats and catness, you know, my cat, I'm sorry to say, is not going to make the type of contribution that's going to improve the chances of cats surviving into the future. You know, it's a function of nature. It's something which is creative in essence, because the universe is creative, but it's not willfully creative. And so this willful creativity, which finds manifestation in our connectedness to history, who we choose to read, who we choose to have, to support, to defend, who's dead, who have died. For instance, in this movement, Kennedy, right? Is it possible that we could bring Kennedy forward and Kennedy's policies and pick up where he very abruptly left off? Because he was a defender of humanity. And he did it in all kinds of ways. And we have the opportunity, in terms of our intention as individuals, to relate to that, to relate to that idea and say, that's what my life's going to mean. Because we have all types of choices. We could also say that our life is going to mean, you know, I love Prince Charles. You know, I think he is amazing, and I want to make my life a fruitful expression of his life's work. Right? You know, which just means that Prince Charles will take another generation to die. You know, unless in actually going into the work of someone like that there is a shred of truth, that there's somewhere in there, in spite of the mistakes, that there is something of lasting beauty. And that's the only thing that's going to survive, because unless our efforts were based upon that intention, we wouldn't have made it this far. None of us would be in this room right now. A lot of us wouldn't even exist if it weren't for that intention to create a better future for future generations and to honor those who fought for it in the past. If that motivation, impetus, did not exist within us, if it wasn't part of our very nature, we would have jumped off the cliffs like the lemmings a long time ago, right? Or still be fighting for scraps of warthog or something, you know. So yes, Socrates is speaking to this enduring type of happiness, which is that connectedness, to connection with history, and to know that you're actually, your life is being expended in service of mankind. And anyway, let's continue. We finally reach justice, and it's a bit of a longer reading. I have a long reading, so I think this is the longest reading. And yeah, in section 5, justice in state and individual, it finally comes to an idea of justice. And the reason I include this long reading is because it shows a type of method that Socrates uses. It's a longer development of an idea. There's rigor. Socrates is very rigorous. He leaves no stone unturned. And so this is the way the argument unfolds in a sense, and why we choose to go in this direction in terms of our ideas and development rather than this direction, because this direction has been exhausted and either found to be correct and true and serving the purpose that we set out, or not that way, or eliminated. So let's have a Socrates. Yeah, good. I'll be Glaucon.
Okay. We have pretty well reached agreement that there are the same three elements in the personality of the individuals as there are in the state.
True.
Must it not follow, then, that the individual is wise in the same way and with the same part of himself as the state?
That is so.
And that the individual is brave with the same part and in the same way as the state? And that there is the same correspondence in all the other constituents of excellence?
That must follow.
And so, my dear Glaucon, we shall also say that the individual man is just in the same way that the state is just.
That must inevitably follow too.
And I suppose we have not forgotten that the state was just when three elements within it each minded their own business.
No, I don't think we've forgotten that.
Then we must remember that each of us will be just and perform his proper function only if each part of him is performing its proper function.
Yes, we must certainly remember that.
So the reason ought to rule, having the wisdom and foresight to act for the whole, and the spirit ought to obey and support it.
Good. Just a note here, the three aspects of the personality which were also found in the state are reason, spirit, and appetite. Okay, so he's saying here that reason ought to rule. And the spirit, which is the part of us that allows us to stand up in spite of the fact that our life might be threatened, or in spite of being scared in some way. That spirit ought to obey reason. Certainly.
Appetite would be the
Well, I think
to have or to go towards something, to
Drive.
put into action, a motive force sort of.
yeah, of that nature, yes, but a more physical motivation.
Right.
Yeah.
Would be more like body, soul, and spirit.
Okay. Certainly.
And this concord between them is effected, as we said, by a combination of intellectual and physical training, which tunes up the reason by a training in rational argument and higher studies, and tones down and soothes the element of spirit by harmony and rhythm.
Certainly.
When these two elements have been so brought up and trained and educated to their proper function, they must be put in charge of appetite, which forms the greater part of each man's makeup and is naturally insatiable. They must prevent it from taking its fill of the so-called physical pleasures, for otherwise it will get too large and strong to mind its own business, and will try to subject and control the other elements, which it has no right to do, and so wreck the life of all of them.
Yeah, so here, there is another aspect of appetite, I would say, where the idea is to prevent the satiation through physical pleasures, but to turn appetite perhaps towards other things, a thirst for knowledge, and in a sense train the appetite. I think there's an element of that in this too. True.
At the same time, won't these two elements be the best defense that mind and body have against external enemies? One of them will do the thinking, the other will fight under the orders of its superior and provide the courage to carry its decisions into effect.
Yes, I agree.
And we call And we call an individual brave because of this part of him. I think when he has a spirit which holds fast to the orders of reason about what he ought or ought not to fear, in spite of pleasure and pain.
That is quite right.
And we call him wise in virtue of that small part of him which is in control and issues the orders, knowing as it does what is best for each of the three elements and for the whole made up of them.
Yes, I agree.
Then don't we call him self-disciplined when all these three elements are in friendly and harmonious
Agreement.
harmonious agreement? When reason and its subordinates are all agreed that reason should rule and there is no civil war among them.
That is exactly what we mean by self-control or discipline in a city or an individual.
And the man will be just by following the principle we have stated so often.
That must be so. I just want to emphasize that here we have the idea of reason, and its subordinates all agreed that reason should rule. You know, compare that to what we think of our leaders.
Well then, is our picture in any way indistinct? Does it look as if justice in the individual were different from what we found it to be in the state?
I can't see any difference.
If there are still any doubts in our minds, a few commonplace examples should finally convince us.
What sort of examples?
Well, suppose, for instance, we were asked whether our state or a man of corresponding nature and training would embezzle money deposited with him. Do you think we should reckon him more likely to do it than other people?
He would be the last person to do such a thing.
And wouldn't it be out of the question for him to commit sacrilege or theft or to betray his friends or his country?
Out of the question.
And he would never break a solemn promise or any other agreement.
Certainly not.
And he would be the last man to commit adultery, dishonor his parents, or be irreligious.
The last man.
And is not the reason for all this that each element within him is performing its proper function, whether it is giving or obeying orders?
Yes, that is the reason.
Are you now convinced, then, that justice is what produces men and states of this character?
Yes, I'm quite convinced.
So our dream has come true, and as we guessed, we have been lucky enough, with God's help, to run across a basic pattern of justice at the very beginning of the foundations of our state.
Yes, we have.
In fact, my dear Glaucon, the provision that the man naturally fitted to be a shoemaker or carpenter or anything else should stick to his own trade has turned out to be a kind of adumbration of justice, hence its usefulness.
So it seems.
Justice, therefore, we may say, is a principle of this kind. Its real concern is not with external actions, but with a man's inward self, his true concern and interest. The just man will not allow the three elements which make up his inward self to trespass on each other's functions or interfere with each other, but by keeping all three in tune, like the notes of a scale, high, middle, and low, and any other there be, will in the truest sense set his house to rights, attain self-mastery and order, and live on good terms with himself. When he has bound these elements into a disciplined and a harmonious whole, and so become fully one instead of many, he will be ready for action of any kind, whether it concerns his personal or financial welfare, whether it is political or private, and he will reckon and call any of these actions just and honorable if it contributes to and helps to maintain this disposition of mind, and will call the knowledge which controls such actions wisdom. Similarly, he will call unjust any action destructive of this disposition, and the opinions which control such action ignorance.
That is all absolutely true, Socrates.
Good. So we shan't be very far wrong if we claim to have discovered what the just man and the just state are, and
No.
in what their justice consists.
No, we shan't.
Shall we make the claim, then?
Yes.
So much for that. And next, I suppose, we ought to consider injustice.
Obviously. Any comments?
If you're going to create individuals who obey reason and not appetite, then how are you going to educate them? Obviously not according to the external pleasures
Yeah.
or immediate pleasures.
Yeah. True.
Well, what does that mean in a modern education system? A lot of
Okay.
kids, they want that A+ so they can show their parents
Good.
you can get a Nintendo or something.
Good. Well, that's a great question, and it's what Socrates ultimately gets to. I might how are we doing for time? I would like to be able to finish up in another 15 minutes or so. So basically, you see this. No.
Okay.
Yeah. Go
Well,
ahead.
Just because if it can't come from outside, then for there to be a truly free state, which, the state reflects in every citizen in the state, every individual must achieve this internal standard of truth, of reason.
Right.
If it's not to be imposed on them by something outside,
Right.
that capacity must be developed in every individual.
Yeah. Well, and so that's the intention that Socrates goes out with to define what the curriculum will be in education. Because remember, what's the intention? The intention, well, funnily, it's a bit of a sidetrack, but the intention is to create the ideal state, one which tends to produce citizens who are of this nature: disciplined, courageous, wise, and loving of the good. And that this is truly the best type of state to have. And so but as we've seen, is if we have to get away from this idea of the sensory, the physical, in order to put our minds to the defining principles in order to actually get to the truth, because the changeable is not real. It is the unseeable principle, which is the most real. So I'm going to jump ahead to section 7. There's a discussion where someone challenges Socrates and says, "Well, what you're describing is impossible." Right? And so he has to meet this challenge, which I'm not going to go into too much, but he goes and he proves that the philosopher ruler is possible, even probable, given these certain conditions. And then he goes into the difference between knowledge, true knowledge, and opinion. And this leads ultimately into what is the most famous idea from the Republic, which is the allegory of the cave, which separates different states of the mind. And so this is a discussion of that idea between opinion and knowledge. This is something that we come up against all the time. we find it very hard to break outside of our opinions to actually focus on what matters. Our entire political system is run around opinion with polling, and people get quite offended when someone stands up and says, well, hey, that's not true. It won't work. And people get offended saying, you know, I got my opinion, got yours. And this is called, well, this finds its modern expression in liberalism, where we're afraid to assert that something is true and another thing is not. But think of what that means for our survival. You know, I like the example of building a bridge, right? You want to just build a bridge any old way, any materials you like, you know, a paper bridge. You know, you probably could build a paper bridge, but there would be principles involved that would allow you to have the strength to hold whatever weight it was that you were intending to hold. Likewise, the well-being of a nation is not something subject to mere opinion. There's not 1,000 ways to get out of this crisis, for instance. There's one way, and LaRouche has developed it. And so we really have to develop in our minds an understanding of the difference between a mere opinion and something which we could actually assess to be true. And what is true is going to be the principle which is governing the effect that we see. Some examples are like all of the wars that are going on in the Middle East. You could go and look at the individual leaders of each of these nations, the individual leaders of the various opposition groups or the terrorists. You could even bring in the involvement of various nations and try to, piece by piece, discover what's going on in particular situations. And you might think that what's going on in terms of the disastrous drug running in Mexico is separate from the phenomenon of trying to go to war with Iran. But when you understand the principle of oligarchism and its expression in the British Empire, what you realize is that every single one of these events that we find so hard to stomach is perfectly in harmony with the oligarchical principle. It destroys our lives, it destroys our cultures, it ruins our capacity to think. That's a success from the perspective of the oligarch. And that is the essence of what we are fighting here. So if you want to really get them in the Achilles heel, so to speak, because we are, you know, they do appear to be a larger force in terms of who's got the guns, who's got the money. Luckily for us, we have examples in history where inferior forces, in terms of numerically inferior, beat superior ones on the battlefield. The example of Friedrich the Great versus the Habsburgs, which LaRouche mentioned recently in the simulcast, is one such example. And LaRouche, I love it. He said, yeah, they came out and beat him twice in the same day. You know, and they had fewer people, they had a less trained army, but they could think. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that they came out of a process of the re-education of the Prussians by the Humboldt system, which was, does anybody know?
I remember reading, it was the Humble was himself a general.
Yeah, he was, and they were defeated, and that's why he was called to reform the education system, because for military reasons they had to pick things up, and so he was called in. He reformed the system, and but I could be wrong in terms of but the principle is the same. Is that Friedrich the Great was and his army were governed by a superior principle, so that in spite of inferior numbers, as we are today, we have the superior ideas. we can defeat this omnipotent but very, very stupid oligarchy.
Principle of the flank.
But only if we can subject ourselves to some humility and question our basic beliefs about the situation. Opinions versus, so let's read that. Okay. Shall I read?
I can read.
You want to do Socrates? Okay.
Tell me this. When we say someone has a passion for something or other, don't we mean that he wants everything of that particular kind and not some things only?
Yes.
And so, philosopher's passion is for wisdom of every kind without distinction?
True.
Then we shan't regard anyone as a lover of knowledge or wisdom who is fussy about what he studies, especially if he is young and has not yet the judgment to know what is good for him and what is not. Just as we don't say that anyone who is fussy about his food has a good appetite or a passion for eating, but call him a poor eater and not a food lover.
And we shall be quite right.
Me too.
Oh, sorry.
But the man who is ready to taste every branch of learning is glad to learn and never satisfied. He's the man who deserves to be called a philosopher, isn't he?
That description covers a lot of peculiar people. For those who love looking and listening, enjoy learning about things, and so fall under your description. But they're a peculiar lot to class as philosophers, because nothing would induce them to spend time on any kind of serious argument. They run around the city and country Dionysia, never missing a festival, as if they were under contract to listen to every performance. Are we to call those who share such tastes, or are devotees of the minor arts, philosophers?
Certainly not, though there is some resemblance.
Then who are the true philosophers?
Those who love to see the truth.
That is clearly right, but what does it mean?
It would be difficult to explain it to anyone else, but you, I think, will agree with me on the following point.
What point?
That since beauty and ugliness are opposites, they are two.
Of course.
And as they are two, each of them is single.
That is so.
The same is true for justice and injustice, good and evil, and all qualities. Each of them is in itself single, but they seem to be a multiplicity because they appear everywhere in combination with actions and material bodies and with each other.
That is true.
I use this principle to distinguish your sight lovers and art lovers and practical men from the philosophers in the true sense, who are the subject of our discussion.
And how do you do it?
Those who love looking and listening are delighted by beautiful sounds and colors and shapes, and the works of art which make use of them. But their minds are incapable of seeing and delighting in the essential nature of beauty itself.
That is certainly so.
And those who can reach beauty itself and see it as it is in itself are likely to be few.
Very few indeed.
Then what about the man who recognizes the existence of beautiful things but does not believe in beauty itself and is incapable of following anyone who wants to lead him to a knowledge of it? Is he awake or merely dreaming? Look, isn't dreaming simply the confusion between a resemblance and the reality which it resembles, whether the dreamer be asleep or awake?
I should certainly say that the man in that state of mind was dreaming.
Then what about the man who, contrariwise, believes in beauty itself and can see both it and the particular things which share in it, and does not confuse particular things and that in which they share? Do you think he is awake or dreaming?
He is very much awake.
And so, because he knows, we can rightly call his state of mind one of knowledge, and that of the other men who holds opinions only, opinion.
Certainly.
And if the man who we say holds opinions but does not know is annoyed, and questions the truth of our statement, can we manage to soothe him and win him over gently, without letting him know the extent of his disease?
We certainly must. So then he goes into a conversation about how to win the person over,
That's called political organizing.
which is called political organizing, which would be so that's what I have in terms of the slides. At this point, Socrates says to the people listening that we have to go higher than the original virtues of the state. We had wisdom, courage, discipline, and justice. And there was a protest saying, well, certainly we've reached the top. I mean, there's nothing higher than justice. And so Socrates says, well, actually there is, and it's the good. Because where do all of these things emanate from? Where does justice emanate from? Where does courage? What do they have in common?
Qualities of virtue.
Right, but why would you prefer, say, courage to bravado? Or why would you prefer justice to, intimidation?
Reality.
Wow. You know, one is lawful, the other one tends to beget destruction.
Yeah. Well, the idea that he develops is that would you take anything as your own if you could see no good in it?
Are you trying to say, does a person want
Like,
things that are not good?
Yeah.
No.
No?
Yeah. Like, would there be any point in having justice or courage or any of these things if there were no good in it? And so he says, well, then knowledge of the good is the most important knowledge of all. And this is the idea that he says that the true philosopher has to have their mind trained upon. And then he's challenged and says, okay, great. That's great, Socrates. So what's the good? And he's like, and he makes a joke to Adeimantus. He says, oh, come on, man. It's been obvious for a long time that you were not someone to be swayed by someone's opinion. Adeimantus says, hey, come on, that's not fair. You can't just say that the good's the thing and now you're not going to tell us what it is. He's like, well, didn't we just say that opinions didn't mean anything? So why would you want me to give you a half-baked idea about what good is when I myself have not mastered the idea? And he keeps going back and forth with Adeimantus, and finally Glaucon jumps in and says, come on, Socrates. You got to do something. You have to explain the good. In my mind, Socrates is just reeling them in, right? But what he says is that I can't give you a direct idea of the good. But what I can give you is something in the form of a child of the good. And then Glaucon makes a joke. He says, well, then give us the interest and you can pay the loan later. Because the word for child and the word for interest is the same in Greek. Right? The interest is the child of the loan. And so that's what leads Socrates into his idea of, he develops three similes for what the good is. The first is the sun simile, and then there's the divided line, and finally the allegory of the cave. And these are really three parts of the same thing. We often only hear about the allegory of the cave, or at least I had only heard of that. So I'm just going to show those to you now. Ideas of it. Let's see. I'm sorry, this might not be as clear. Oh, that's good. Okay, so I'm just going to... Okay. So what he says is that the good is analogous to the sun. The good is to thought what the sun is to vision. And he develops the aspect of light and being a good thing, and so you have the sun, and it's the source of growth and light. It gives visibility to objects of sense and power of seeing to the eye, and then you have the faculty of sight. The good, on the other hand, is a source of reality and truth. It gives intelligibility to objects of thought and the power of knowing to the mind. It is the faculty of knowledge. And this, if you think of a discovery, if you think of making a discovery in science, the virtue of that, or the value of that discovery, will be in its capacity to give you a superior concept of the process. It will be better. And so you have that reference. I don't know, does anyone else want to say anything on that?
Well, could we say that it would increase your ability to further pursue the good?
Sure.
Having made a discovery, it's the
Yeah.
same idea of the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
It's this continuous.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in economics, I mean, the good is what gives humanity power to survive. And so we're doing everything, you know, our policies over the past 60 years have done everything to decrease our capacity to survive. And the policy that LaRouche is pushing, which he says right now are two, Glass-Steagall and national banking.
What was first?
Glass-Steagall, which is a law to separate speculative debt from real physical debt. And you protect the physical, the actual debt, and you let the speculative debt die on the vine. You know, why concentrate on that as opposed to anything else? There are a lot of great causes out there. But it's only these two that can actually create the environment within which all the other ones can succeed.
Right.
You have to create the very monetarist system itself is the poison. It's like eating a very good meal within a toxic environment.
What was being alluded to when you said, like, when you suggested a non-monetary system? What's the next?
Oh,
We can get to that
well,
in question and
yeah.
answer.
We can get into that because we should get into that at the end. I'll try to just wrap this up quickly. So this gives one idea of the good. The second concept that he develops is the divided line. And so he gives, in a sense, he rates the different ways of thinking. At the very bottom is illusion, which you can see, you know, which you can relate. If you're only in the realm of illusion, it's very hard to know reality. And belief. And illusion and belief both fall under the idea of opinion, whereas mathematical reasoning and actual knowing, intelligence, fall under the idea of actual knowledge. I'm going to go, I would like to develop this more, but I'm going to go straight to the cave because it gives, now I've got, don't look ahead. Here.
That's a whole class in itself.
No, I'm just going to, there are many images that you can get on the internet for the idea of the cave. This is perhaps my favorite that I've found. I like it for many reasons. But the idea of illusion, who is not familiar with the idea of the allegory of the cave? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to show you perhaps a different one then. The idea is that there's a fire burning, And between the fire and some chained prisoners, who you see sitting in the front there, there is a road with a wall. And along the road, there are some performers walking. And they are holding various objects above the wall that create a shadow with the fire onto the wall in front of the prisoners. And the prisoners, because they've been chained there their whole lives, think that those shadows are real. And they develop a whole culture around these shadows. And they even reward each other for insights into what the shadows mean, or being able to predict certain sounds to happen in concordance with various images on the wall. And eventually, someone gets away. And they're obviously pretty much in the dark because they're in a cave, just the firelight. Even looking at the fire for them is actually a little bit jarring. But when they turn from the wall to look at the fire and the road, they're now entering a different level of a thought. If we go back to that idea of the line, the idea of the shadows on the wall are pure illusion. And when you make the shift and start looking at the fire, well, then you're into a higher realm, somewhere belief, and sort of perhaps even if you can make out what's going on, you're into the idea of reasoning. I like this one here because you see the prisoners there on the left, and there are the shadows. You see the performers. They're putting their various objects and marching them by the fire. And then on the inside of the cave, but with his hand stretched through the opening, you see a prisoner who's escaped and realizes that everything that they've previously thought is wrong. Like it's not reality. That there's this higher reality governing everything that they're seeing, and it's not what they thought. It's not even two-dimensional. It's three-dimensional. There's all kinds of things going on. And what I like about this one is that you see this someone on the outside already, and he's actually helping the other guy through. And I haven't seen this particular illustration before. But of course, when the prisoner then looks to the hole of the cave, completely blinded, and walking out, dazed, stumbling, walking into rocks and trees and horses. But ultimately, that the prisoner does become accustomed to, first of all, looking at the ground, then looking at reflections in the water, and finally is able to look at the sun itself. So the entire process from, I would say, I think they've got it right here. You know, you have knowledge being, okay, the guy's already on his way out of the cave. But both the performers and the slaves are both in the area of belief and pure illusion. Opinion. But there's a funny thing that happens because there's this impulse in the person who makes it to the sun, like out of the cave, to actually go back and like tell his former friends, hey, you guys gotta wake up. There's so much out there, right? But he goes back into the cave, and of course, when he walks back in, he's just as blind as when he had walked out the first time. It's a different kind of blindness, but he's now stumbling around in the dark. And when he goes back to tell the prisoners, who are quite secure in their knowledge, they know what's going on. And in fact, there's some people, they are like awesome at predicting what's going on. And they see him stumble back in, trip over their chains, get down, he's mumbling something, he's in pain, and telling them, hey guys, you're out to lunch, you're missing the point. Well, there's a few reactions. Either they want to kill him, because, you know, the person who, let's say, is the most revered of these slaves, who's really accomplished in predicting the shadows, has some sort of, you know, has a position among the slaves. And he doesn't want any part of this. He wants to shut this guy up as fast as possible, but the general population's kind of like, you don't know what you're talking about. So I like that idea. It's an idea that I hadn't heard before about the idea of the cave, where when you do actually come to know something higher, we gain this sense of the British Empire, which is really just the current manifestation of oligarchism in general. And then to go and to tell people who are still absorbed by popular culture and even a whole system that's tending to, like the dancers here, who are tending to keep them that way. There's a bit of a delay between when you're able to say these things, when you're stumbling over your words, when your ideas of the concepts are not fully formed, and then when you actually gain a bit of poetry and are able to actually inspire people to actually break the chains and face the pain of facing the fire and facing the outdoors. And so in this scenario, the good is represented by, the good is ultimately the sun, the thing which sheds light on everything. And so, I'm sorry, I'm going to end it there with just a mention that he does, in the next section, go into the education of the philosopher. And there's a very important aspect in that, where there's the role of ambiguity, and the way that they chose which subjects would be taught was based upon their capacity to elicit thought. And what he said was that if you've got a concept that is easily adducible directly by the senses, well, this is insufficient for our purposes. If you can adduce something directly with your senses and pretty much know all the important things about it, this is not the type of thing that is going to spur you to ask questions and investigate the matter. Whereby, if you're investigating something which gives you contrary perceptions, then the mind, the mind is awoken, is awakened, and now you're inspired to ask the questions that will lead you to an understanding of the unseen principle, the actual truth, Socrates' truth, which is behind the scenes. What was it that caused the prisoner to break his chains and walk out of the cave?
Must have been, like you said, a paradox. Something doesn't make sense to him. Something doesn't appear right.
Maybe the sounds that day, the performers were off, they tripped, stumbled, and went, oof. And well, I've heard people go oof. It's like my buddy here with bed sores. Maybe there's other people that I don't know about. So it's actually in that way, and only in that way, that we can make the essential discoveries that we need to make in order to, in a sense, graduate to the next level as a species. Our evolution relies upon this ambiguity, and to be trained, in a sense, or train ourselves to delight in this type of confusion. The type of confusion that excited ancient astronomers to question the actual motion of the planet Mars, because Mars is moving past the fixed stars and then moving back, and then does a little loop. It moves back. There's a retrograde motion there. And the area of mathematics, mathematical reasoning, is as far as most people got. Most people only got to the math, and they were able to construct incredible mathematical models which worked. which predicted the future positions of Mars within some degree of accuracy, good accuracy. But it was only Johannes Kepler who took up the challenge of discovering the true motion of Mars, to be able to see that motion in spite of not physically being able to see it. And so part of the curriculum, besides arithmetic, plane geometry, solid geometry, is the study of astronomy and the study of its sister science, as Socrates suggests, harmonics. And of course that's Kepler. And Kepler, being a student of the Renaissance, student of Cusa, founded modern astrophysics, upon which our knowledge of the cosmos and our ability to exist in this universe depends, absolutely. And so I guess I'll just end with saying the idea for the type of thing we have to do has existed for a very, very long time. I would say that it is more a part of our nature than people's excuse for their bad actions, which is that human nature is greed and war. And that our true happiness resides in our capacity to connect with that aspect of our mind which can see and delight in the paradox and see the metaphor, see the truth coming through the apparent conflict. So we're here now. It's endgame. We have to beat the odds. Their time is rapidly running out because it's not only human problems that we have to face, there's a galactic crisis coming on. And our capacity to overcome it, our capacity to actually become the truly immortal species that is our potential, to exist past the type of crisis which any other species would succumb to, relies upon our understanding these things, understanding this ambiguity, understanding these deeper principles which are generating everything else that we see. But we have to believe that it can happen. And so I would recommend thinking from now on and developing a deep and healthy love for humankind. Because you have to believe that there's a point. If you don't love humankind, then who cares whether we live or die? But how do you love it? I think it's exactly what our friend here said, was that you love humanity by actually coming to know what humanity really is. And not succumbing to other people's idea of humanity that is imposed upon us. It's simply not true. And those things that we want are actually our means to salvation in this way, to overcoming this crisis and having a bright future. So thank you very much. It's been a lot of study. I guess we normally save this kind of thing for a different kind of class, but thanks for coming and thanks for listening. Yeah. We can break up into smaller discussions, or I can take a few questions now if you wish.
I just wanted to kind of make a comment, because based on what you were just saying at the beginning, of continuously getting used to and enjoying getting outside of your comfort zone and pursuing these ambiguities. If you think about everything that we have to do right now to get out of this crisis, they're all outside of sense perception, right? They're all outside. We're talking about a galactic crisis, which involves processes that are much greater than most people can possibly imagine. And like often people are pessimistic in our culture because they're looking for a solution in their surroundings. But that's where you have to get creative, because the solution isn't anywhere. It's only if you're able to come up with a new idea.
Right.
which is outside of sense perception once again.
Yeah,
won't
thank you
find
for
it
bringing
in-
that up. Yeah, because that's an idea I wanted
That's
to
what
hammer
you're-
home, was that in our failing system, you're not going to find an answer within the system. And so we have to go outside. What is not happening? What concepts are not existent?
Mm.
In a way, what's missing from
Right,
our
that's
conception of the human being is more dangerous to us than these negative things that are put upon us.
That's provoking.
So human creativity is that way. It's always outside the box. That's our potential genius. All right. Anyway, I said the reason we're having trouble with them is that the math program is essentially incompetent. I said this to the principal, and he kind of went, yeah. You know, Ministry of Education. So, there's a problem. I'd like to, sorry, just one more case where there was a relief teacher, and it was an 8th grade class teaching history, and they were teaching something which, to anybody who's politically aware, who's fighting for the Republican cause, would cause them great angst. And so this was on the subject of American imperialism as a concept. This is official Quebec history class. I'm sorry I didn't bring the example, but this is something that's handed down to the teachers as curriculum, teaching about the ideas of American imperialism. Now it's kind of a joke because in this particular class, there were a couple of young girls a couple of students who I'm sure were high. One of them was stroking the hair of one of the boys, whose hormones are going crazy anyway, and he was just kind of laying back and chilling. The rest of them are kind of playing little games, doing anything but listening to the teacher, and then the special needs students who I'm working with, who are actually fairly keen to learn, are looking at me imploringly to, hey, can we go somewhere else? And but I went up to the teacher afterwards and I said, what you're teaching is factually incorrect. What you're teaching is just just actually wrong. And I wasn't really digging into her because I know it's not her per se. And she said something very interesting. She said, well, if I don't teach the curriculum the way it's laid out, I could stand to lose my position. I could stand to lose my license to teach. So there's a pressure on our educators, and I've met many of them obviously, and I have a lot of respect for the individual educators, many of them. There's moments of magic that happens in these classrooms, but they happen in spite of the curriculum and not because of it. I'd like to just read a couple of things from a guy named John Gatto, who wrote, he's written a few things, but one book called Dumbing Us Down caught my eye. And there's a lot of problems with his analysis of what's going on, but you'll see that the way his take on what's going on, I think, is fairly accurate. So okay, wait a second. That's pretty small. Can everybody read that? Is that okay? If we move the machine, it's going to go yellow on us. So, does someone want to give this a crack? Okay.
During my time as a school teacher, I've come to believe that genius is an exceedingly common human quality, probably natural to most of us. I didn't want to accept that notion. Far from it. My own training in 2 elite universities taught me that intelligence and talent distributed themselves economically over a bell curve, and that human destiny, because of those mathematical, seemingly irrefutable scientific facts, was as rigorously determined as John Calvin contended. The trouble was, that the unlikeliest kids kept demonstrating to me at random moments so many of the hallmarks of
Hello, everybody. My name is Meredith Hayes. For a few of you who might not know me, but I think most of you do. I'm very glad to be here. Almost didn't make it. Birth was tough. Not to mention, but I did okay with birth, and kindergarten was tough. I still remember reaching out for my mother. She left me there for the first time. I did a little bit better in elementary school. High school took a bit of a hit there too. But anyway, perhaps you can relate to the idea of not liking high school. Anybody else in the audience not like high school? Yeah, a few. Well, considering all the stupid acts and everything that we go through, it's amazing that we survive our teenage years. But anyway, I'm glad to be here, and specifically I'm glad to be in this room. It's a chance to contribute to something that's very close to my heart, this movement. And in no other place on earth will you find, outside of this movement, such a concentrated form of leadership of the type that we need right now for the kind of change that we need. I'm out of my comfort zone. I'm not used to public speaking. I'm not trained in it. Maybe there are some people in here who are out of their comfort zone as well. Is there anybody here who's here for the first time? Are you here for the first time? So you're out of your comfort zone. Did you know what you were getting into when you came?
I kind of had an idea. I had one up with Dave Nelson.
Right. Well, congratulations. Congratulations for making it out, for getting out of your comfort zone. I think a lot of us are in the same boat. I mean, it's an actual, I would say that to make it out here in person is really a revolutionary act in itself. In our culture, which is so used to getting information online or in some other form, to come out to an actual conversation is something of a revolutionary act. So congratulations to that. Now, our presence here actually, I would further say, shows leadership, and that leadership is desperately needed in the world at this time. In order to learn requires that you get out of your comfort zone. You cannot learn while you're in it. So the full-time members of this movement are out of their comfort zone on a daily basis. It's their job. And you learn to have a taste for it. You learn to distrust being too comfortable for too long, especially considering the current situation. It's a bit crazy to be comfortable under these conditions. So, good on us. Now, what brought me to lead a class on education? The title that I gave to my class.
Human excellence, insight, wisdom, justice, resourcefulness, courage, originality, that I became confused. They did do this often enough to make my teaching as easy, but they did it often enough that I began to wonder, reluctantly, whether it was possible that being in school itself was what was dumbing them down.
Do you want to continue? Just read the next one.
I've noticed a fascinating phenomenon in my 25 years of teaching, that schools and schooling are increasingly irrelevant to the great enterprises of the planet. No one believes anymore that that scientists are trained in science classes, or politicians in civic classes, or poets in English classes. The truth is that schools don't really teach anything, except how to obey orders. This is a great mystery to me because thousands of the humane, caring people work in schools as teachers and aides and administrators. But the abstract logic of the institution overwhelms their individual contributions. Although teachers do care and do work very, very hard, the institution is psychopathic. It has no conscience. It rings a bell, and the young man in the middle of writing a poem must close his notebook and move to a different cell, where he must memorize that humans and monkeys derive from a common ancestor.
So pretty bleak, pretty bleak. And like I said, you know, there are problems with his analysis, which I won't go into right now. But I think that certain parts of what he's saying here speaks to a general feeling among the population and among educators about our education system. There's a problem. So, what's happened to us? What's becoming of us? Here we are, as Jean-Philippe, I'm sure, briefed you, on the edge of extinction. How do we become so stupid? You know, really. I mean, everybody knows that everything that's going on, all these wars, are a lie. Everybody knows that they're stupid, right? What about the bailouts? Do you think that there are many people out there who think, you know, no, actually the bailouts, they're a good idea? You know, people understand that there's something wrong with this, and a very short briefing by any of our organizers on the streets clarifies to people that this bailout is insane. We don't get a lot of, no, we got to keep bailing out. We don't get any of that these days that I've seen. There's a moment in the Iliad where there's a threat of diplomacy breaking out. There's a moment where there's a lull in the battle, and the two sides start talking about making concessions, about talking to the other side, about seeing if there's a way around this war. And just at that moment, one of the gods whispers in a soldier's ear. And that soldier then throws a spear at the opposition and kills one of them. And the war resumes to the culmination of destroying everything in the end. Do you think anybody's whispering in the ears of the so-called opposition groups in Syria? This was educating a renaissance. Well, I work in education, and I work as an aide with special needs, and in my job I get to obviously work with a lot of different students. I'm assigned to certain students, but I also tend to work with a lot of the students who are having troubles of one type or another. Maybe they're not specifically coded, but we as aides tend to hang with them. And in doing so, what I saw, I started off working at high school, and what I saw was that among these kids, especially the kids who were having troubles, was that there was a whole bunch of genius left in our school system, among our student body, left unmined, essentially untapped. And that's something which needs to be rectified. Then I moved to elementary school, and I saw something quite different, where in high school the mood is, there's a lot of angst. Now that could be simply hormonal, but I don't think so. You have a situation where things tend to get worse over time. And so, but then in going to elementary school, I realized, hey, this is not the way that kids come to school. I like elementary school quite a bit. It suits me a lot more. There's a lot more energy. Kids are a lot more bubbly, you know, goofy, but also quite willing to learn. So what happens to them over the course of their education where they lose this enthusiasm for learning? Not everybody, but certainly the ones who have trouble have a greater attrition, let's say, in the education system. And even I would say the ones who are successful, knowing what we know from studying with the LaRouche movement about the basic axioms, the basic beliefs of what we're teaching, in a way the talented students get off even worse. And this is a process that we see degenerating to the point where in organizing and in trying to get people to be excited about putting themselves into the process of creating real change, we often have more trouble with people who are educated at the university level than we do with people, you know, who for one reason or another didn't go to university, or if we talking to people who are before they're going to university. So something's going on. The general feeling among educators in the schools is what I believe, which is our curriculum is incompetent. And I've said as much directly in those words to aides, to teachers, even to one principal. And I don't get, I would have thought that being an aide that I would have gotten a little bit of resistance to this, someone to tell me, sort of put me in my place, but I actually got agreement. I've gotten agreement across the board. I've yet to have someone snap at me and say, you know, who the heck are you? What do you know about education? I went up to one principal and I said, you know, the reason we're having trouble with these students, who I took it upon myself to take these students out of class to try and teach them something because they were disrupting the class and they weren't learning anything anyway. What about a whispering in our own ears? What do you suppose is the residue of environmentalism in terms of our outlook for humanity? Does thermonuclear war matter if there are really just too many people on the planet? And I can tell you, it's part of a bigger project for me, but I can tell you that these ideas are being pushed in our schools as standard curriculum. I mean, I have fun challenging them a few times. It's not hard, you know. Pros and cons of wind energy. You know, this and that and the other, and then I put up my hand, and the teachers are always very generous. I am allowed to participate in the learning process. This is a grade 10 class, and I said, well, because wind energy is not renewable. Wait a minute, we're on the renewable energy column here. You know, and it's very easy to explain to people, well, you can't make the steel, you can't create the machines with wind energy. It's not, you can't renew it itself. You're going to burn down your fossil fuels to the ground. You know, you're going to use them up faster if you go with these policies. Okay? So we're also on the edge of a renaissance. I mean, the tragedy of this situation is not that everybody's trying their darndest and we're just coming up against, you know, insurmountable obstacles in the natural universe. This is not our problem. The solution to this problem is well defined. We have a whole slew of amazing projects to undertake. So, we need to internalize these. We need to light a fire of optimism within our hearts, kick ourselves in the butt, so to speak. And we have to beat the odds and rescue humanity from the edge of making a terrible mistake. Rescue humanity from the certain despair that will result from our failure to succeed in this revolution. So what will the policy look like that we can adopt, such as will create a culture, nation, and citizenry of which we can be proud to be a part? So this is a work in progress, and my basic thesis is that the Renaissance that we need will require a new and truly revolutionary expression of the Platonic school of thought concerning mind, truth, beauty, and the good. Also, that this principle does not exist currently as a dominant policy principle in our education system. And finally, that such a state of affairs, that our success in this, that our success in creating this change will be a product of human intention and not of the gambler's chance. It's not an ebb and flow of the chart, so to speak. Okay. I'm going to be concentrating on the more positive